Bradley, and today I'll be talking to you about the women's suffrage movement in the United States. This was during the late 1840s and on. So basically, women's suffrage means for the women to be able to vote, and during this time, women were not able to vote. And so not only was this pushing for women's rights, but it was pushing for other equal rights for women, like working, stuff like that, not just voting. So today I'm going to start off with the beginning. And so in 1848, July 19th, there was a convention held in Seneca Falls, New York. And this was actually the first convention held. It was for women's rights and women's rights to vote. And so it was led by two women by the name of Mott and Stanton. And they actually had lots of experience in this field. They had been in England previous to this, pushing for anti-slavery rights and other things like that. So they were basically here for the United States women to help them get started on this movement they wanted to make. In 1833, before this meeting, so this was 10, 15 years before, there was actually a college named Oberlin College, and they allowed women to come to college there, and this was a big thing. So this had been stirring up for a while before the convention started. But women who went to college there, they could only get degrees in teaching, nursing, but the law field or things like more higher up positions, they could not get teaching for. And for me, that's actually really upsetting because I plan on going into the law field, and so it just shows how far the United States has come. But I'll continue on that. This is not the only thing that they were pushing for with women's rights. Voting wasn't the only thing. They were also pushing for anti-slavery, the temperance movement, which was no alcohol, and other things, but voting was the main thing that they were pushing for. And this wasn't just happening in the United States, it was also happening in England, and so this was a big thing going around in the world. The reason for this problem, what made it come about, was that when the founding fathers were making the Constitution, they actually didn't think about women and their rights. They were more focused on the men and how they got to control everything. So women, as soon as they got married, everything they had went to their husband, and they were just seen under their husband. So this was, and they also saw women as being in the kitchen or taking care of the kids. They didn't see them as having the right to vote or to go out and work the important jobs, so say. So they've been pushing for this for nearly 30 years. And then in 1861, the Civil War happened, and so the whole push for women's suffrage actually came to a halt because nearly 3,000 women were helping with the war, whether they were being nurses or helping provide supplies for the war. So everything came to a stop. In 1865, the war was ended and slavery was abolished. So it's important to remember that the United States was actually going through a lot of changes during this time. In 1870, so this would be 9 years after slavery was abolished, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado actually allowed women to vote, but the 19th Amendment still wasn't passed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's actually an interesting fact that a lot of people don't realize is that women's suffrage and the idea of it actually didn't come about in the East, but more came about in the West. And so as we know, people were going to the West to start a new life, to farm and to run cattle and things like that. So women in the West were working with their husbands. They were fixing fence, they were helping with cattle, they were going out to get food to eat, compared to women in the East where they were expected to just stay in the house, take care of the kids, and they were basically kind of living an easy life. So women in the West were like, you know, why do we not get the right to vote? Why don't we get equal rights? Because we're doing the same things that our husbands are doing, that our brothers are doing. So we should get the equal rights. And so one of my favorite parts about this whole project is that about a woman named Jeanette Rankin. And if y'all didn't know, I'm from Montana, and so Jeanette Rankin was the first women congressman, and this was in 1916. She was elected into the House, and she was one of the only 2 Republican representatives in Congress. And it was in 1916 that she was elected, which was 4 years before the 19th Amendment was actually passed. So, which was for women to be able to vote. And so she actually was in Congress before women were able to vote, which is just crazy. She pushed for women's rights. She was a big advocate for women's rights, women being able to vote, better health care for children and women, and also better working conditions for the people of the United States. So she was actually also the secretary in 1910, so just about 6 years previous to this, she was the secretary of the National American Women's Suffrage Movement. So she came into this house from Montana, she came into this position from Montana with lots of experience and a good perspective, so she was able to do a lot for this. One of my favorite quotes by her actually was, "I may be the first woman in Congress, but I won't be the last." And that just shows how far the United States has come from then. 71 years after the Seneca Falls Convention, like we talked about previously, the 19th Amendment was passed, and women's rights were starting to come about, basically. Women were able to now vote, but it doesn't mean that everyone was still happy about it, basically. It didn't stop the women from pushing for equal rights. They were still pushing for equal rights regarding gender discrimination, because voting wasn't the only thing. But finally, the 19th Amendment was passed, which was a huge win for the women's suffrage movement, but it did take 71 years. Now in society, I would say personally that women do have a lot more rights compared to other countries, but I also haven't been exposed to a lot in society yet, especially in the workforce. So I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing how women are influenced in the workspace due to their gender, because gender discrimination is obviously still a thing. But if we do look at other countries, we are way ahead. Like, look at North Korea or China. We are way ahead compared to other countries with women's rights and being allowed to vote. So go US. This was a very pivotal time for America. But that is basically the outline of women's suffrage. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.